viewed committee, according to the statistics that have been compiled. It's absolutely not personal, Councillor O'Neill.
And yet you deal with both deal with the same matters.
All right, we'll open the meeting at 9:12 a.m. Thank you all for your attendance. I welcome wholeheartedly Councillor Bob LaCastro to our committee this morning.
On debut.
What this man...
On debut.
For one night only.
24 years and he's on debut at planning.
Wow. Wow. Great for you to be here. We also welcome Councillor Barden Lumsden, who is a much more frequent visitor, so thank you for coming. And we otherwise have a full member count this morning. All right, should we just do the confirmation of minutes, councillors? Someone like to move that? Moved by Councillor Hamill, seconded by Councillor O'Neill. All in favour? Against? Carried. That's a bit of a water committee double act there. And conflict of interest declarations. Councillor Gates, I note that we've got one in relation to 6.1.
I do. In 6.1, thanks, Chairman. In 2011, I received $675 from RPS Planning. I presume they're associated with RPS Australia, mentioned in the body of the report, but I'm seeking to remain in the room because I've had no contact with the consultant for many years, and I personally believe the donation is minor and remote, such that a reasonable person would trust that a final decision would be made in the public interest.
Councillor Vorster, did you have a question or something?
No, I'm happy to move a procedural motion that Councillor Gates may participate in the decision despite the Council's conflict of interest because the relevant party has absolutely no interest whatsoever in the decision to install fairy lights in the street trees or not. Yeah.
Oh, not allowed to comment.
How do they feel about splash lights?
Okay. Someone like to second that? Councillor Pauline Young. Anyone want to speak to that? Otherwise we'll take the vote. All in favour? Councillor Hamill, Councillor Owen Jones, Councillor Peter Young, Councillor Vorster, Councillor Pauline Young, Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Caldwell, and Councillor Gates did not vote.
Thank you.
We'll move to...
Happy to move the items, Chairman.
Second.
Sorry, we'll just hold the phone. We've got a number of start items on the agenda. Would anyone like to unstar any of these?
6.1, please.
6.1 for Councillor Vorster.
It's already unstable.
Councillor LaCastro.
Thanks, Mr Chairman. I would
6.2.
request that 6.2 be, thank you.
Yep.
6.3, please.
Okay, 6.4 and 6.5 remain starred. Would someone like to move those?
So 6.4 is LG?
Yep. Someone like to move it? Move the start items or not?
Can't change anything in that item, can you?
I mean, if you want to pull it out to talk about it, we can. Otherwise, that and the strategy in relation to the outstanding items for 2 and 3.
I mean, I'd like to just put something on the record with the LG.
Okay, let's just unstar 6.4 and 6.5 was already unstarred. So let's just go through them in numerical order. 6.1.
No,
All right. Did you want to move that, Councillor Vorster, and then speak to it? Is that
Look,
what
I'd just
you're
like to move a slight change.
Yeah. All right, let's bring the recommendation up.
No, I'm happy to move the change recommendation.
Yeah.
So presently it reads that the lead petitioner be advised that fairy lights will not be installed on the trees in Varsity Parade and Lake Street at this time, but will be considered for future installation as the nighttime economy in Varsity Lakes grows. Full stop. If we could add a second. That council notes the tactical urban projects detailed in the report, which will be considered as part of the 2023-24 Division 11 Local Area Works Program, which will largely satisfy the underlying objectives of the lead petitioner, which are, to support local retail businesses by better activating the nearby street frontage and lakeside precinct.
Okay, someone like to second that? Happy to second it.
And if I can briefly
Councillor
talk to
Lawson, do you want to speak to it?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Look, first and foremost, I just want to flag with city officers, and I have made declarations which council have supported and allowed me to participate in this debate. Just want to flag again, I have a friend, an electoral donor, operates a business in the precinct. My brother owns an office suite. I've previously made those declarations, so I don't need to make them again here. I was contacted by a local business who requested the installation of fairy lights down Varsity Parade because in their view that was required to bring this the centre up to the same standard as, say, Chevron Island and other precincts across the Gold Coast. City officers considered the installation of fairy lights and they were simply not value for money. Fairy lights were installed in this area prior to my election. I think $15,000 were spent and the fairy lights didn't last very long because they were strapped to branches which grew and everything kind of snapped. In order to protect the ratepayer dollar, in order to light up these trees, what really would be required is some under-road civil work, which would blow the cost out astronomically. Also, the retail mix on that strip really doesn't demand the installation of ornamental lighting because there isn't presently much of a nighttime economy in place. What we do have, though, is an opportunity to better activate what's called Varsity Promenade, which forms part of the quay of Varsity Lakes. And in order to support that activation, the members of our city placemaking team have put together a plan of new embellishments and soft upgrades, and that plan will form part of my Division 11 Local Area Works program, which is proposed for next financial year. And councillors will have an opportunity to support that or otherwise when we adopt the budget. The purpose of adding this second part to the changed recommendation is simply to signal to the lead petitioner that although they have not had their particular suggestion progressed, we are actually investing quite heavily or propose to in the precinct to support the same objectives as they hold. So different solution to the same problem. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
All right, anyone else want to speak for or against? Take the vote, all in favour? Against, carried unanimously. Thank you. Great presentation. I mean, that's the benefit of doing a thorough report, right? You know? Yeah, exactly. Okay, 6.2.
The fairy lights go. Not the office.
Why is that? I should have put the fairy lights in. I don't know what you should have done.
So if it helps, I'm happy to move the item.
All right, well, let's, I'll make a note of that, councillor Owen Jones. I'll come
I'll
straight
second that.
back to you both as potentially having the first option if I feel like that's what I want to do at the time.
Well, we
Why don't
can either do it here or do it at council, whichever is easier.
Well, in my experience, it works better at council, but,
Well, now that we have
all right, should we just stop this?
now that we have non-committee members attending today, maybe it won't.
Councillor Lacastra has attended this morning, particularly for this item, so I think we need to give it our due attention, and we'll start with a presentation, and then councillor Owen Jones, I'll come to you for a motion.
Through the chair, good morning, everybody. Item 6.2 is a dual occupancy application located on a corner lot at 11 Kincardine Drive, Benoa, with a lot size of 755 metres squared. The proposal is subject to impact assessment due to the density requirement of 1 dwelling per 400 metres squared in the low density residential zone. The proposal seeks to establish 2 dwellings with a residential density of 1 dwelling per 377 metres squared in lieu of the 400 metres squared. The building height is 8.9 metres and with 2 stories and a partial third. The ground floor site cover will be 53%, and each dwelling will be accessed via an individual crossover, one via Kincardine Drive and the second via Roderick Court. The local context is that the site is located within the well-established area of Benoa Waters within the low-density residential zone. It is in close proximity to local transport routes, and the character of the area is a mixture of large 2-storey dwellings and single-storey dwellings, with some houses having built boundary carports. The subject site itself is a square corner lot with a size that is a size of 755 metres squared. It benefits the 2 frontages, and at the moment is currently improved by a single-storey dwelling house. These site photos show the subject site at the moment in with its existing older style single dwelling home. So the ground floor of the proposal has AO compliant setbacks to the adjoining neighbouring dwellings, with a small encroachment to the front boundary setback of Kincardine Drive. Both dwellings propose built to boundary carports. These achieve the appropriate amenity outcome of 50% transparency, as well as the front fence. Landscaping is included outside the front fence, but also inside of the site boundaries that softens the built form along Roderick Court and Kincardine Drive. The dwellings are separated and are viewed from the street as individual dwelling houses. The first floor has similar setbacks to the ground floor in regards to AO compliant to the neighbouring dwellings, and a slight encroachment to the front setback of Kincardine Drive, with a reduced site cover of 30%. The partial third floor has AO compliant setbacks, is centrally located within the 2 dwellings, and the opened areas are orientated towards the street to prevent overlooking. These elevations show that both dwellings will appear as individual dwelling houses. And the built form that will integrate well within the existing character of the area. The key considerations for this proposal was the residential density, being 1 dwelling per 377 metres squared, not as it doesn't comply with the 1 per 400 metres squared. The strategic framework identifies that dual occupancies are contemplated within the low density residential zone where they are located on a dual frontage, will occur in low concentrations and achieve a low intensity, low rise outcome. An analysis of the surrounding area and the site has found that the proposal can achieve these benchmarks as it is located on a dual frontage corner lot. The dual occupancy, there's only one other dual occupancy in the area, and it's located 130 metres west of the subject site, therefore achieving a gentle scattering effect. The character of the area is currently of large dwelling houses that have some existing bulk in the area. The resulting built form, setbacks and site cover represent something that is already existing in the area with those large dwelling houses, therefore achieving the desired outcome of the low density residential zone in this context. Public notification, we received 74 properly made submissions, 1 petition containing 29 signatures, and 18 of those submissions were in support of the development. The concerns raised by the submissions objecting to the proposal regarded site cover, on-street parking and traffic safety, privacy, the precedent that this development is going to set, the overdevelopment of the site, and the partial third story height. These concerns were all considered during the assessment of the development, and the proposal is considered to address all the relevant city plan benchmarks. This slide shows the submissions in a broader context of the Gold Coast. And in conclusion, the proposed development complies with the strategic framework to provide housing options in the suburban neighbourhoods. Officers' recommendation is approval for the development in full with conditions. Is there any questions?
Thank you. Councillor Vorster, question?
Could I just ask a question on the carports? Right, so were city officers, through you, Mr. Chairman, satisfied that there were other homes in the area that did not have garages and relied on carports exclusively?
So I've done multiple site visits. I've got a couple of slides here. The top slide is the adjacent neighbouring dwelling.
Yeah.
The 2 neighbouring dwellings, they both have carports. I'm not sure if they had garages as well as the carport. And then the second image is the 2 properties directly across the road. So they both had carports as well. I didn't look inside to see if they had garages as well as carports.
Right, so, and I'm not suggesting you go out to site again, and maybe I'll have to rely on Councillor Castro, but I'm generally reluctant to say that the proposed outcome is consistent with the balance of the area if the rest of the dwellings provide for garaged car parking as well as a carport, because I think a dwelling with only a carport is very different to a garage and a carport. Sorry?
Sorry, I just was pointing out that where renovations occur or new dwellings, it's called a car park. Even if it has a garage door on it, it's still called a carport, and it has a requirement to be open. So it doesn't mean there won't be a garage door on it.
Oh, no, totally understand that.
So it looks like a garage for every other...
From the street. I totally get that. I'm just saying how, if we are relying on a comparison of how this development looks and functions compared to the surrounding neighbourhood, for me, one of the lenses I cast on is where the homes have got sort of closed garages that are safe and secure,
I think most of them that come right up to the property boundary and they're right across our city
Yeah.
are carports.
Yeah, as I said, I haven't been to this neighbourhood, so I'll have to rely on the local councillor.
Yeah, understanding that question, the development is compliant with the AO compliant car parking rate. So I understand that some may have 4 car parks, but in this
No
case-
worries. No. And I'm not really concerned about the rate. I'm just trying to think about the character of the area.
So just on that point, my understanding from the officer's assessment is that there's 21 carports on properties within a 100-metre radius.
Yeah, but what I'm interested in is whether those other properties with carports also have enclosed garages.
Right.
And I just wondered whether, when they carried out their neighbourhood analysis, whether they broke down those figures. It doesn't sound like it, which is fine. It's something that I'll pick the brains of the local councillor. Can I just ask, in terms of site coverage, how did we land? And I want to ask a follow-up question about the site coverage and those carports.
Sure. So the site cover on the ground floor is 53.2%. Level 1 is 30.46%, and the partial third story is 10.33%.
And, okay, so, and the acceptable outcome is?
50.
50, so it exceeds the acceptable outcome. Now, the proposed carports, are they permeable or impermeable?
They only have 2 sides. So they're are you talking about...
So
like,
I just want to understand whether the garage, which is a concrete pad and will perhaps have some sort of roof, whether that has contributed to the 53.2% site coverage.
Yeah,
Yes, it has.
through you, Mr Chair, carports and garages are both considered site cover.
Okay, great. And if the roof was like permeable, so it was more like a pergola rather than a sort of enclosed roof?
Through you,
What would happen
Mr
then?
Chair, that would reduce the site cover. This application is for a roofed carport, and officers have made an assessment and considered that it does comply with the performance outcome.
Right, and just last question. So the mapped height here is 9 metres, and this is below the mapped height. What would happen in a situation where we have an area that is unmapped in terms of height?
The zone code has a requirement of 2 stories.
Okay, so, okay, that's fine. All of my questions answered, thank you.
Councillor Hamill.
Mr Chair, following on from the site cover question, just there was one image you had that shows the neighbourhood around it. Could we go back to that one? So that one will do. So from my layman's eye, that would appear that a lot of the neighbouring properties are well over 50% site coverage on there. But was that actually assessed by officers?
As part of the site analysis, I went to the site a number of times. A lot of the existing homes, I feel, are built forward because of the canal frontages, and they have built then from an aerial image, extended the pergolas and everything. So yeah, that was taken in consideration, that the area has an existing high site cover of the existing dwellings.
Specifically, through the chair, specifically to the question, we didn't analyse a percentage of every lot or a number of lots. It was more as what you'd see from the street, like John explained, but not actually mapping out every lot and working out what a percentage they might have on those lots.
That means without actually mapping it, that is very obvious that a few of the existing neighbouring properties are well over 50% site cover. And I think to any person that drove these streets and saw the existing houses versus what's proposed, they're not going to be able to tell the difference.
I'm just have a photo of some existing homes in the area. So these are some existing dwellings on Kincardine Drive and surrounding areas. So,
So it is obvious that it's very strongly the officer's opinion that the proposed development matches in with the existing character.
yes. Exactly.
Which was one of the key concerns raised by submitters, but from looking at that, I can't see how that could be their concern.
Yeah.
Councillor Pauline Young.
Just I guess just a comment. Something like that would be really handy in the report, because obviously you've been out and you've had a really good look at the area, because when you say 100 odd carports within that distance,
Yes.
and we all know, and there's not a person in this room that could admit it, that if you went and asked those people who have built carports at the front of their renovated properties to lift up their garage doors, they're either an unapproved room or they're full of all of their, you know, stuff that they don't want to stick in storage or give away. So, or home gyms and things like that. So I think extra carport, a permeable carport, is actually, and the rest of the property is built, we actually know what's going to be on that site unless they actually start closing in garages and that. So I think that that slide more than anything else goes to show the character and that of the area, and that this property here actually doesn't sit outside it. If you said all single level little beach fibro dwellings or something, I'd understand, but a presentation like that just goes to show that this has been carefully thought out and is a good urban renewal in that area.
That's the best slide of the presentation.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
No questions.
Councillor Owen-Jones, did you want to move the...
I'm happy to move it. I'll take Councillor Pauline Young's remarks as the opening and...
Will you?
Who's chairing the meeting?
Okay, so we'll move by Councillor Owen-Jones. I think Councillor Gates wanted to second it. Councillor Owen-Jones, did you want to open?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Councillor Castro, did you want to speak to the item since you have taken the
If I
time
could,
and
Mr.
care to
Chairman,
attend for you?
that would be very much appreciated if I could. Thank you. But, Mr. Chair, firstly, I don't have any issue at all with what the council officers have done here as far as the extent of the investigations they've undertaken. I think John has, you know, as he said, he's been out on site, he's looked very, very carefully, he's answered everything, and I can understand why the committee is sort of saying, well, yeah, you know, because it is a very thorough presentation. My issue is not with the officer's interpretation of this. The issue for me is the scheme. We basically have a scheme which says that when we get a corner block that's 800 square metres or more, and as long as you've got the dual road access, the frontage, so you can actually have access from, in this sense, Roderick Court and also from Kincardine, then basically you can subdivide and do that. But it makes it quite clear that it's 800 square metres. This block is 755 square metres, and the dwellings are going to be sitting, so we're looking at 377 square metres. My concern and rhetorical question, I guess, is where does it stop? It always seems to be, well, yeah, you know, it's about 50 square metres under, but, you know, we can still make this work. Is it 800 square metres? Is it 750? Is it 7? Is it 650? We're finding throughout the city that, and Mr. Chair, you actually had a situation at the last council meeting, and I think your one was sitting on about 650, 655, something like that, square metres. And it seems to me that it doesn't seem to matter. We might as well just throw that out the window, the 800 square metres, because no matter how, and I think in places like Varsity, we've even got blocks, we've actually got dual occupancies sitting on, so each one would be sitting on around, what, 300, 270, 300, which to me is absolutely insane. So I can understand, as I say, from an officer point of view, why they've come up with this, and so I can't fault what John has done and what the other officers done here as far as saying this is how it meets the requirements with the acceptable outcomes. But the fact is, it's not an acceptable outcome for the local community. And yes, we can actually look, and John's absolutely right, I've been on site, I know the area well, even though I only inherited this area at the last election. But yes, within 120 square, metres radius, 120 metre radius, yes, there are a number of two-storey buildings, as you saw there. But in the immediate proximity, when you actually drive into Kincardine, I say, but Kincardine, I would say, with the Scottish, but anyway. But when you actually drive in, the overall appearance is one of, low-rise, single dwellings. Yes, there's one at number 8, I think it is, and I think you actually had it on the screen, but yeah, which is, just opposite. But in the immediate vicinity, there isn't anything else. Roderick Court, of course, that's a little cul-de-sac, everything is low-rise there. So for the immediate neighbours, yes, Edinburgh Road, Benoa Road, when you get onto those larger streets, there are a lot of bigger properties. These blocks, some of these blocks are a lot smaller than those blocks, and whatever you say, this building, and let's face it, architectural merit is a bit like art, and beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. What I might think looks attractive in a building, someone else might think looks, but ugly, and vice versa. And vice versa. But the thing here is, architecturally, yes, it's whether you like that or not, you can see that it's going to be a quality home, but the site coverage is over the acceptable site coverage, and the overall appearance of this is something that's quite bulky. It just looks bulky. I know it's 10% on the top, I know it's 30% on the middle level, and I know it's 50, 53, 54 on the bottom level, but the overall effect when you drive in is you're just going to get this bulk, and it is going to look out of character with the immediate area. And the partial third story, again, yes, it's just under that 9 metres, but again, that just makes it again look quite imposing and out of character. So from my point of view, there's no way in the world that I'm going to be able to support this when it comes to full council. And I can fully understand why there were 56 submissions objecting to this, and I can understand why there was the petition with another 29 names. I always look at any situation like this was, how would I feel if I was living next door to it or within close proximity to it? And I certainly wouldn't want it next door to me. So obviously there's a mover, there's a seconder here, we'll see how that goes. But to me, the development doesn't fit, even though I can understand why the officers have said it has. I can't fault, as I say, what the officers have done. My gripe is really with the scheme and the fact that we just keep, how much leeway do we give? So thanks for allowing me to air my grievance.
Thank you. Councillor Pauline Young, then Councillor Hamill.
Thank you, Through the Chair. I know that Councillor Castro said 56 objections. There was some in support as well?
Yeah, through the Chair. There was 18 in support of the... Yeah.
I just wanted that on the record, because it's not that everybody within the local area is objecting, because there are people in the area that would, or who don't live in the area, who would possibly like the opportunity to live in that area but unable to buy a site big enough or a house big enough to suit their needs. So I think I just wanted that on the record, that there was actually... One
submission in support was a adjoining neighbour on Roderick Court. So one neighbour was in support and one neighbour was against the development.
Oh, that's interesting too. Thank you very much for that.
And that's not the house you occupy, is it, Bob?
No. Thanks, John.
Councillor Hamill.
Mr Chair, I just wanted to get clarification, because Councillor Castro brought up acceptable outcomes, but just clarification that while it doesn't meet a couple of the AO outcomes, that when reviewed under the strategic and performance outcomes, it does meet requirements. I feel like it was very selective to only bring up the acceptable outcomes and not refer to the other two parts of the planning scheme.
Through you, Mr Chair, that is correct. An alternative outcome is only one way of meeting compliance with the city plan. Officers always go to the PO, the performance outcome, for the actual assessment. And in this case, officers are convinced that the application meets all relevant performance outcomes.
Right, anyone else want to speak for or against? Otherwise, Councillor Jones, over to you. Oh, sorry, Councillor Gates.
Thank you. I'll be supporting the officer recommendation, Chairman. I think we have to be very careful we saw in our budget documents the increase in appeal costs, and when the performance outcomes are met...
Sorry, Councillor Gates, just a reminder about what is confidential in our...
I didn't mention the figure.
Just a reminder before we start going any further.
No, I won't go into detail, but the fact is when the performance outcomes can be met and the officers provide us with a recommendation, having given thorough consideration to all of those performance outcomes, and they tell us that it complies with the strategic framework, which is the level above our general scheme when impact assessment is undertaken, it's foolish not to accept the officer's recommendation, because any resulting appeal, in my view, would see us go down the gurgler. So this is a fine-looking development. I can appreciate Councillor Lacastre is doing his best to represent his community, but in my view, looking at the perspectives on page 179, what you see is two amazing-looking developments that will provide uplift to that area. And we know that these can only be delivered on corner blocks. I'm not sure if this is the first of its kind in that area, Councillor Lacastre, or how many opportunities exist for something more, but they do look like individual dwellings. And I just think we need to give really careful consideration when something is being designed and brought to our attention that complies with what our planning scheme envisages. So I'll be supporting the application.
Thank you. Councillor Gates. Councillor Owen-Jones to close.
Thank you, Chair. So just a couple of observations. Firstly, it's not a subdivision, it's a dual occupancy, and that's the scheme allows for that and clearly allows for it to be salt and peppered through this zoning in the context of corner lots. The 400-metre benchmark is effectively elevates it to a higher level of assessment, which is what has happened here today through the impact assessment as opposed to being code accessible. Councillor Lacastre will be aware that we have we don't have a prescriptive scheme, we have a performance-based scheme, and we've had the images that we've seen today of what's proposed been described in a range from butt ugly to uplifting. So I think that...
Sorry, Mr Chairman, if I could, I wasn't saying it was butt ugly.
I don't think the comment was directed at you, Councillor Lacastre.
No, but I'm saying I wasn't saying that
I wasn't calling you butt ugly.
No. Sorry, I wasn't saying that this architectural design for this building was, but I was talking in general terms of when we look at architectural design, some people might think it's beautiful, some people might think it's butt ugly. As I say, I think architecturally, I think this is, as I say, it looks really good, but it looks bulky, so I wasn't referring to this property.
Right, okay, thank you. I apologise if I misunderstood your reference. And ultimately in this Benowa area, as we're going to see in part 2 of today's substantial papers for the planning, we've got growth in the city, and in the Benowa area, the estimated population over the next 20 years is destined to be another 500 people living in the area. So it's going to go from 7,000 to 7,500. And it's going to do that through the gentle change in the landscape that is allowed for by the planning scheme. So in that regards, it's under the height. It was triggered to a high level of assessment because it was less than the 400 square metres. There is no black and white as to what too small enough is. But Councillor Lacastre, you'll recall when a similar dual occupancy came through recently at Helensvale, that was around the 320 square metre mark for each of the dual occupancies. So I think that we will continue to see these come through, and it's only when they become incredibly smaller than those square meterrages that we've already approved that we'll probably have a problem with them.
Thank you. I just wanted to address the comment from Councillor Gates, because I wouldn't want there to be any misapprehension as to the state of our conduct of appeals in the Planning and Environment Court, which is something that I, as the Chair of Planning, personally track very closely. So I just referred back to some of my notes, which are the refer to publicly available documentation on the court's website, for example, in relation to our number of appeals received and resolution rate. And that's to say that at the moment we have 54 appeals open in the system. The equivalent number to that when I was first elected in 2012 was in excess of 120. In 2012, we were making approximately 2,500 decisions in a year, compared to an equivalent number today of in excess of 6,000. I don't need to explain the metrics of that by way of good decision making that has been a feature of the last 11 years, which has actually reduced the rate of appeals per decision because we are making better decisions. And the cost of appeals is driven predominantly by the type of appeal that we engage in, and I and all of us as councillors have never taken a backward step in doing whatever is required to protect the interests of the ratepayers on matters which are complicated and expensive, such as quarry appeals, of which we've had one previously that we won and one that we're running at the moment. So I'm very happy to take any questions on those matters, but our position on appeals has been that we have been receiving somewhere between about 45 and 70 appeals annually, and we have an in excess of 100% resolution rate per annum, which is the rate at which they come in the door and go out the door during any given 12 months. So I think for anyone watching at home, they should have a great deal of comfort that we are not spending any more money on appeals than is absolutely necessary, but at times where we feel that we need to actually put the hammer down, we will back the ratepayers in the position that we want to take to court. So on that basis, I'll close debate on this matter and we'll take a vote. All in favour? Division, Councillor Hamill, Councillor Owen-Jones, Councillor Gates, Councillor Peter Young, Councillor Vorster, Councillor Pauline Young, Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Caldwell. Against? Carried unanimously. Councillor Barton-Lumsden, welcome back. Item 6.3. All right, councillors, we've unstarred this one. Councillor Owen-Jones, you had a question?
So,
Oh, we got a little presentation?
No more.
Okay, let's have the presentation, hey? No? Let's just, well, I mean,
I actually just had a simple question, but
yeah.
so the question was in regards to the 4 options that we've been presented. Can option C happen by itself?
Through the chair, yes. Yes. Through the chair, option C, yes, it can happen by itself. So just to expand on that, so each of the options can occur, they're independent of one another. It's just option D is effectively a combination of option B and C, and that's the option that's been recommended by city officers.
All right, do you just want to, I assume the presentation's fairly short?
Yes,
Brief.
of course. Yep.
Do you want to just run through?
Okay, sure. So good morning, councillors, chair. My name's Anne McKenzie. I'm the Coordinator for Culture Heritage, and I'll present on behalf of the Office of Architecture and Heritage today. The purpose of the presentation really will be twofold. I guess firstly to provide a summary report of the Streets of Remembrance project, and secondly to present the 4 options for council consideration. The Streets of Remembrance project commenced in 2021. essentially is a commemorative badging program focused on World War I service and auxiliary personnel. The project was extended in 2022 and expanded to include World War II service and auxiliary personnel. Over the 2-year period, 36 streets across our beautiful city have been badged with great community feedback. There have been some challenges through that process. For example, this year, despite significant research, over 60% of the leads could not be validated, either because there were a lack of records or because that lead was shown to be incorrect. Nonetheless, we've had great community feedback, and I believe it's engendered community pride and a collective sense of Gold Coast identity. As we can see in the photo, we've got Mrs. Panetz, who participated in this year's media event. She was there commemorating her late husband, among others. Sorry, her late husband's father, among others. So the project is scheduled to conclude on the 30th of June of this year, but city officers have presented 4 options for council's consideration, should you wish to continue. If we do continue, the Office of Architecture and Heritage can deliver the project in time for alignment with Anzac Day 2024. So I'll just present the 4 options now for you. So option A is effectively a continuation of the commemorative badging program, this time picking up on the 22 possible leads that were identified during the pilot stage of the project. The estimated cost is between $50,000 and $100,000 because of the significant amount of research that would be required. The likelihood of success has been estimated to be low because we have no confirmation that any of those leads can be validated. Option B is effectively a shift in focus to the war memorials across our city, of which we know of at least 45. With a focus on recording, assessing and presenting that information onto a rebranded web page, which we're suggesting is called Gold Coast Remembrance. This is estimated to cost between $35,000 and $45,000. Option C is to focus on the Gold Coast war, homefront war narrative to increase the community's understanding of the experience on the Gold Coast. This has been estimated to cost between $5,000 and $10,000 and also has a high likelihood of success because we'll be drawing on existing information. The last option, but not least, is option D, which is effectively a combination of B and C. In other words, the war memorials as well as the Gold Coast homefront narrative on a rebranded web page called the Gold Coast Remembrance. This has a high likelihood of success, and we believe it presents great value for money and would be of great community interest. For this reason, it's been presented as a recommended option.
Thank you. Councillor Owen-Jones.
So if I could just ask a couple of questions through you, Mr Chair. Firstly, in regards to the research that identified some of the streets that had been misspelled, what was our final, where do you think we should finally rest with that, leaving the streets as they are currently identified?
Through the chair, we've identified those misspellings on the web page so people can find out a little bit more about those. There is a process if the city would like to undertake a renaming of streets, and we can investigate that if that's a decision on the floor.
Yeah, unfortunately it can be a bit complicated when there are, so it's everybody's mailing addresses, it's all of their legal documentation around mortgages, etc. So I'm pleased to hear that they're identified on the web page, but I don't know whether or not we need to pursue the change of the blades or the streets formally. When we had a briefing a couple of weeks ago, we mentioned whether or not there should be a process that could be created. So rather than option A, where we pursue research over 22 possible leads, but maybe a process that could be created where if a councillor was aware or was made aware of a street that might have been named after a deceased service person, whether or not that could be brought forward to city officers for consideration. Did you give any consideration to that?
Through the chair, we can certainly make nomination options on the webpage where the community can have an accessible link.
Yeah, so clearly it would come at a cost to research to make sure that the thought was right, and likewise during the briefing we had that discussion. I think there was a clutch of streets in Southport where they had been named after both service personnel who had been killed in action, but also service personnel who had served. And I think that we saw this program being very much a program to recognise those that had been killed in action rather than necessarily those that had served.
Yes, through the chair, we could also potentially just amend the existing web page just to make it clear that the community can nominate streets. So that would be a fairly simple adjustment to the web page. It just comes down to how that would be financed.
Okay, thank you. And my final question was just in regards to the memorials being in option B. Would they be both memorials on public property and also memorials on private property?
Through the chair, it was intended that it would be all memorials across the city, regardless of the nature of the tenure. So we actually have a huge number of war memorials across the city that come in all shapes and forms. Some of them are actually, for example, cenotaphs with the names of service personnel. Some of them are figurative representations. And some of them are actually buildings that we have.
Yeah,
and
and I suppose I ask because I know of at least 4 examples. So the Oxenford State School have a display as such, which was funded by the federal government. Sea Change have Arundel have an area. The Sanctuary Cove have a designated area now as well, and at Maudsley, the Coomera CWA on their land have a memorial which is used for dawn services. So that's just 4 examples, and I'm assuming that throughout the city there'll be a lot more like that.
Through the chair, yes, there are many, and actually all that information is readily available. We did a bit of reconnaissance just in anticipation of putting together the report, and it was confirmed there are well over 45 across the city, and in addition to that a number of additional plaques, for example. And all of that information could be included onto a web page for the community's interest and also as a resource, because that currently doesn't exist. It's all kind of spread across multiple platforms currently.
Councillor Peter Young.
Thank you, Chairman. You've already mentioned cenotaphs, and I did have a question specific to that through your chair. Because the document talks about war memorials, but I know, for example, at Nerang that there's not a memorial in the sense that we have at Upper Coomera, but there is a cenotaph outside the Memorial Club. So would that be included?
Through the chair, yes, it would.
Great.
So we're using the term war memorials to capture all nature of memorial, whether it's a cenotaph, an obelisk, for example, a plaque. Sometimes it's a building, and some of which are actually owned by the city.
Thank you. And if I might just use this opportunity to draw your attention, the RSL sub-branch at Nerang has a honour board, which is just in their room. It's very old and is the original, and it would be good for that to be included as a piece that gets reviewed. With the proposal that's before us, there is still scope, I need to be sure, for people to nominate streets, even though we're not specifically preferring option A. Is that right?
Through the chair, we could certainly, as I mentioned earlier, we could amend the website to enable that. It would just about how that research would be funded. That hasn't been taken into account should we pursue with option B and C.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
All right, councillors, someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Owen Jones.
So I'm happy to move it, yeah.
Moved by Councillor Owen Jones, seconded by Councillor Vorster. you want to speak to that, Councillor Ramsden?
Yeah, I think it's been a great program, and
Here.
and I think it clearly reflects the city's commitment to those that have served for Australia, and I think it's been incredibly well received by our residents, and it's a touching tribute, and a digital, the ability to have information easily displayed digitally will be, I think, well received by the Gold Coast population as well.
All right, anyone else want to speak for or against? Might as well take Councillor Petty-Young.
In terms of funding, if there are streets nominated, and, you know, I'd be prepared to submit local area works funds from Division 5. I believe this program is enormously important. Thanks.
Through the chair, thank you very much.
Okay, councillors, we'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously.
Thank you.
Wasn't it nice that our agenda fitted in one folder this week? It fitted in one folder? No, I'm not missing it at all. Okay, councillors, item 6.4. Right, we've got a presentation on that?
Through the chair, well, good morning. Through the chair, we've got a very short presentation.
Perfect. Just how we like them.
Okay, if we could get this. There we go. Ultimately, through the chair, the purpose of this report is to provide you an update on the local government infrastructure plan. You may recall that council reviewed the LGIP around November, late November, early December, and it was resolved to essentially approve that version to send to the minister for approval for council to adopt. So this report is essentially closing out the last stage of the process. And it also includes some consequential changes to the land development guidelines to ensure that the actual city plan, if it's adopted today, has consistent embellishment standards for parks. As I mentioned, the Minister was sent the draft LGIP in December, and in February he returned a letter to the city advising that he had approved the LGIP for adoption with no conditions. The consequential minor amendments I mentioned relate to the city plan policy, land development guidelines, the section dealing with public park, recreation and sport parks. As I said, it's really to ensure that there is alignment because the LGIP includes updated standards, so the standards that are in the LDGs or the land development guidelines would be superseded by those standards in Part 4 being the LGIP. And if council decides to adopt the LGIP, it's proposed to be incorporated into version 10 of City Plan, which would commence on 4th of July. It's the end of the presentation.
Thank you. All right, any questions, councillors? Someone like to question, Councillor Gates? Question from Councillor Gates.
I presume if there were any anomalies that have been found, we would have to, and we made a change, we'd need to go to public ad again? Or is there that opportunity, or is it final now that the state has endorsed it?
Through Mr Chair, it's final now. Having said that, if we could have some context to the question, we might be able to provide some further details.
There's a multi-million-dollar figure for an inaccessible park within this report at Coomera, and I missed it, to be honest, going through, so I don't understand it. I'll seek some information from Parks officers because we are, I believe, moving straight to LGIP 3, and if indeed I find otherwise, we'll change it for LGIP 3.
Through the chair, as you mentioned, we're planning LGIP 3 and particularly items that are planned in the later cohorts, say 2041, there's the ability to investigate detailed designs and amend costing and so forth so that they can be updated in the next version.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Peter Young, then Councillor Vorster.
Thanks, Chair, through you. Who might I specifically ask about some of the transport infrastructure provisions in the LGIP? Which is the particular officer?
Through the chair, the particular officer would be Nick Presser, who's not here today.
Right.
But we can certainly assist if you'd like to forward any
I'll
questions.
send Nick an email and he can respond to it in due course. Thank you.
Councillor Vorster.
I'm happy to move to it and just speak briefly, Mr Chairman.
Yep, moved by Councillor. Any other questions first? Sorry. Moved by Councillor Vorster, seconded by Councillor Owen Jones. Councillor Vorster.
Thanks, Mr Chairman. Unfortunately, we're in a position where we have to make the best of what I feel is a bad situation, because one of the limits on us as a local government is that the infrastructure projects listed in this plan need to meet an affordability test. And so long as the state government constrains our ability to levy appropriately set infrastructure fees from the development and construction sector, we're not going to be able to deliver the infrastructure we need to meet the population challenges that we have. I mean, I sit to be corrected, but as far as I understand, the amount that we can levy on developers per lot is fixed, has never been indexed since the commencement of the infrastructure arrangements.
Well, it has been indexed.
Has it? It hasn't been
the
lifted.
baseline, there's been no baseline review,
That's
but
right.
we do have indexation.
Okay, but I'd be interested, I mean, my understanding is that the indexing has not actually reflected the underlying cost of delivering the infrastructure and is more or less pegged to CPI. And we know, looking at our own capital works program, some projects to deliver a footpath, for example, in a park is now 35% more than it was just a few years ago. So while I'm happy to see a revised LGIP, which will allow us to guide development contributions to population-driven infrastructure, I worry that we're actually not keeping pace with growth. And that's no fault of the officers. We're working within the constraints of the state government. One of the things that I'd like to see when we look at the next version of LGIP is the definition of what constitutes trunk infrastructure. And in part, we need to work with the state government on that, but I think there are some internal standards that we can be setting to try and unlock better outcomes in the community. That's not work that we could have achieved in LGIP 2, but I think that has to form part of LGIP 3. And lastly, I just want to underscore that I've got some deep reservations around the timing of some of the trunk projects in and around Robina, in particular, the intersection of Robina Parkway and Laver Drive. That's earmarked for commencement or construction in 2031. That is a major project which will probably cost in the order of $50 million, deal with an intersection dealing with like 40,000 vehicle movements a day, and its timing is proposed to coincide with the Olympic Games, where we will have a village constructed, underway and needing to serve the Olympic movement in 12 months. And I think we just need to be sure that when we put an infrastructure project on a map and we assign it a tranche, that we are mindful of when it may actually need to be delivered. And that could be afterwards, but it should also be beforehand, potentially. So in supporting this, I just want to say we've made the best of a bad situation. The state government needs to unshackle us, allow us to extract a proper dividend from the development sector. And importantly, when we prioritise projects, notwithstanding the tranches in the plan, we need to have regard to the real world impact out there, including the Olympic Games.
It's Councillor Vorster, Councillor Peter Young.
Thanks, Chair. I did have one more question, sorry. Is there provision for water quality outcomes in LGIP?
Through the chair, there is. We've introduced, we have the stormwater quality network as part of the LGIP.
Okay. So I'll just speak briefly to it, if you don't mind. I echo Councillor Vorster's sentiments in regard to the cap on infrastructure charges. It's a significant limitation to us as a council and certainly a burden on the community. It's an unfair burden. The great thing about, well, I think LGIP generally is a great thing, the fact that all councils are required to look into the future and anticipate the demands for infrastructure born out of growth. You know, that didn't exist 15 years ago and is a great step forward, and it's imperfect because it is so difficult to anticipate the needs into the future, but there's a hell of a lot of great work in it, and you can only endorse it. Thanks.
Councillor Gates.
Chairman, I wanted to endorse the sentiments of Councillor Vorster as well, and specifically because I have an issue developing at Coomera where we have the Costco about to open in June, we have the Gold Coast Hospital to open in 2027, we have the potential development of 4,000 dwellings on the land north of Westfield Coomera since the property has just exchanged hands. And we have the Coomera Connector dumping onto Foxwell Road. And it's a major concern that we don't anticipate our road upgrades until about 2031, which is some 5 years after we're going to be at gridlock because of all these things that are happening. And I know that the officers are doing some planning work, but I don't believe we can wait that long. There's a road called Road G that would relieve a lot of the pressure. And just yesterday, I had the opportunity at a disaster and emergency management unit meeting to take it up with a representative from Queensland Health, because the hospital construction borders on the land that will be home to 4,000 odd dwellings, and they need a secondary access from that hospital that goes over the railway line. So if we can encourage that to be developed during the state government's work as a contribution, it would be a major step forward. So I've arranged to have a meeting in that regard. But the things I've mentioned, the four things, like Costco will bring people from the Tweed, it will bring people from Ipswich, it'll bring people from Logan. There is a Costco at Ipswich, I apologise, I meant to say Logan. But from all over our boundaries, people will come to use that Costco, and that alone has, 2 minor road entries and access only through either 49 or 54. So we know that we're heading for an absolute disaster in that precinct in the coming 5 years, and we're really hamstrung on doing anything much about it until we can get the funding through the timeframes envisaged through LGIP.
Councillor Hamill, then Councillor Owen-Jones.
Mr Chair, I'll start by endorsing the work like others have, but I think there's another important point that we need to acknowledge in this, and that while I agree about the review of what we get from developers, the other side of the equation is what we set service standards at in terms of what's delivered in the community and what we as a council set as priorities. We have some very expensive, big, shiny projects proposed in the next decade that there may have to be some serious discussions about what is a priority for our community, if it's bringing forward road upgrades, intersection upgrades, or if it's other park or similar projects, that there's going to be some tough decisions as council to make on priorities to meet community expectations, that it's not all just about the funding, it's about what we set as priorities moving forward.
Councillor Owen-Jones.
Mr Chair, I assume that the mover doesn't want to amend it to suggest that we write to the state government seeking a lift of infrastructure charges?
Look, Mr Chairman, I think we've got a couple of standing resolutions on that already, so I don't think it's required. Happy to support it if there's community support. I actually think What the state government need to do is develop an equivalent instrument for their own.
Which is what I was going to go on to say, yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, I mean, and it's the challenge.
Gotcha.
It's the challenge we all face, because when people suggest to us as a council we need to deliver the infrastructure networks, we explain, hopefully, to them that we've got a local government infrastructure plan that deals with the 5 infrastructure networks that we're responsible for, that actually has the costs and how it's going to be funded, whether or not it's through infrastructure charges or through the general rate or borrowings, which has to be repaid anyway. We've actually got a sustainable plan going out to 2041, but when we ask the state for a comparable plan, there is nothing other than promises, you know. So, and our networks are the road, sewer, water, stormwater, and park and rec, you know. So, and that's all that we can look after. But the things that people would like to complain about the most, be it main road or public transport or hospitals or policing, all rest with our friends in the state government, who, if I could wish for anything, it would be a state government that would like to plan for the future and lay out a good infrastructure plan for the next 20 years that marries up with what they require local governments in Queensland, South East Queensland, to do.
Well, surely that's the role of the South East Queensland Regional Plan, which the government does have.
No, the plan is to say there's going to be X number of population. The extension of that is that they actually don't plan and cost the infrastructure.
Of which in previous generations and iterations of the state government, there had been that underlying state government infrastructure plan, and it's currently not something that is a feature of the current state government.
Anyway, nothing's going to change until there's a change of government.
Yeah. Put that on a t-shirt.
All right, any other further discussion or debate? Otherwise, we'll take a vote. All in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Item 6.5. All right, thank you.
I tell you what isn't funded under the LGIP. It's your state.
Thank you, Councillor Lacastre, for your attendance, and I look forward to your commitment to the people of your division at full council. Okay, Gavin. All right, councillors, let's get through this last item.
Through you, Mr Chair. Good morning, everybody. The purpose of today's agenda item is to bring forward the outcomes from the councillor workshop, where we look to progress the outstanding items from the major update 2 and 3, known as the MU 2 and 3. In addition to formalising the outcomes of the councillor workshop, we are looking to have council endorse the preparation of the related amendments within the package, and also to allow council officers to present the tailored notice and the communication strategy which supports the tailored amendment, which is the first Amendment A. Just to recap, the Minister's decision on MU 2 and 3 had 34 policy items. 13 of those were unable to be approved. Those are the outstanding items, the subject of the amendment strategy. This amendment strategy is intended to address those outstanding items shown on the slide before you. As you recall, the Minister's decision focused on 2 particular items that had concerns with, was unable to confirm the impact on housing supply and diversity. Given the concerns raised with those 2 items, the balance of the items were unsupported on the basis that they would create planning scheme workability issues. It's important to note that the balance of each of these outstanding items, they were supported in principle by the Minister during the process. Officers have reviewed each of the outstanding items to identify the policy dependencies. A detailed analysis of each of the items, their content and how they relate to one another is the subject of attachment 4 in the report. As part of the work we've done in preparation for the workshop and the final agenda before you, we've looked at the benefits of advancing each of the items at this time as part of the strategy or deferring it as part of consideration during the 10-year planning scheme review. We've also looked at the complex changes that would otherwise require significant changes to the scheme. Again, those have been considered to be appropriate to be considered as part of the 10-year planning scheme review. We've also taken account of the changes that are recommended to be included in the strategy and for those to be brought forward in the early stages of the amendment. As you will recall, during the councillor workshop, we presented 4 amendments. As part of the councillor workshop, it was agreed that former Amendment B, constituting neighbourhood centre improvements, may cause some potential community confusion where we were proposing to run 2 amendments in parallel. As a consequence, we've decided to defer those matters for consideration as part of the 10-year planning scheme review. You'll see the identified yellow item on the slide, which is the additional text to emphasise the intent to update the strategic framework to address Council's position on future light rail stages, effectively identifying that until such time as those investigations have undertaken, the city plan settings will apply. As you can see on the slide now before you, we've got the proposed...
Gav, do you just want to go back a slide? Could you just flesh out what you just said about the light rail and how that will operate in effect? Is that's to make a clear statement that we're not going to sort of just allow speculative development and unless there's a distinct body of planning work then that is ultimately brought into city plan, then we're not just going to let it run.
Through you, Mr Chair, that's correct. The current version of the city plan has, a broad policy position on investigations for the light rail, rural residential areas that may transition, a number of things. There were a number of changes to address those that position as part of MU2 and 3. We are looking to reintroduce that in a more distinct and narrower form to reaffirm exactly what you've described.
Okay,
that's correct.
Thank you.
The slide before you shows the 3 amendments that are proposed to be sequenced in order. The first amendment is proposed to be a tailored amendment under Section 18 of the Act, which is the tailored notices attachment 3 to this agenda report. In addition to the in-principle support provided by state officers during the councillor workshop, we've met with the state officers a number of times to speak about the content for Amendment A. As part of those discussions, we've been able to engage on them with the tailored notice, and also they've confirmed that the items within Amendment A are suitable to be progressed through the tailored process. The basis of this is that largely the changes identified in Amendment A replicate a lot of the policy outcomes and land use intent sought through MU2 and 3, and they were a policy underpinning that was otherwise supported by the Minister during MU2 and 3. Just quickly go through each of the amendments with a little bit of detail describing the content. Amendment A, as identified on the screen, shows a number of locational specific changes, notably Chevron Island, Main Beach, Sovereign Islands Precinct, Jefferson Lane, and some additional locational specific areas in Currumbin, Pimpamar, Nerang and Southport. In addition to the light rail investigation provision we spoke about, we're also looking to introduce some changes for zoning for access restriction strips, pontoons and jetties, and that's just really to reaffirm the council's current arrangements for land use outcomes in those locations. Amendment A also includes a building height conversion of stories and metres to stories only in parts of the city, and it also seeks to introduce the low to medium density zone, albeit in a revised form from what was presented as part of the MU2 and 3 package. It's important to note that some of the state comments through the process of MU2 and 3 identified that where there are potential changes in zoning heights and densities through successive amendments, it might be best to look at having a process in place to address those matters. So you'll see on the screen there that Amendment B is when we'll introduce the changes for the identified growth areas that were formed target growth areas, and also the first sequence of the station neighbourhoods in through the Stage 3 corridor.
Gavin, I'll just interrupt. Councillor Gates has a question.
Yeah, I do. Sorry, in Part A, Gav, you just mentioned the conversion of metres to stories in some parts of the city. Why isn't it one or the other right across the whole city?
Through you, Mr Chair, the exception to that conversion is the targeted and identified growth areas and also the neighbourhood framework. Those particular locations have different settings to what currently occur, and to bring forward all those changes to those settings in those locations would change and might have unintended consequences for the operation of the scheme. So what we're looking to do is to bring forward those conversion changes as part of introducing associated changes to support the development effectively.
Which means that there'll only be one change in relation to those, rather than all being caught up the first time and then part of them being caught up the second time. It'll be a two-step process to cover all.
So, Chairman, has the state decided we'll go back to stories rather than metres in our next planning scheme? No?
Through you, Mr Chair, the state haven't necessarily expressed an opinion, but the intent is to have the height represented in metres.
In metres. Okay.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Amendment B, as I've mentioned, is identified to give effect to the city plan changes for the neighbourhood frameworks, and particularly the draft Nobby Beach and Miami North Station neighbourhood concept plan and the draft Christine Avenue and 2nd Ave Station neighbourhood concept plans. I guess specifically as identified on the screen, it's intended that this increase in planned development and increase in dwelling supply in these locations comes forward in the second amendment to allow us to introduce those alongside new improved built form and urban design provisions so we can identify the outcomes that we'd like to achieve in those locations. The Amendment C, the third and last amendment of the changes in the strategy, identifies that there will be a review and consideration of the changes to the light rail urban renewal overlay to consider which provisions are important to be dealt with through the overlay, such as podium design and the outcomes that we want to achieve for above ground parking, and consider which of those identified provisions in the overlay might be best dealt with through the zones and the development codes to provide a bit more clarity in the scheme. As you'll see on the slide in front of you, we've got an indicative timing for progressing these amendments. As you'll see today is where we're seeking Council's endorsement for the amendment strategy, and we're also looking to, as part of the subject of the Council endorsement, we'll actually submit the tailored notice and the communication strategy to the Director General to allow us to progress Amendment A, and the content, the city plan content for Amendment A is intended to be brought back in June. So, subject to receiving Council's endorsement for the content in Amendment A and the notice issued by the Director General, we can proceed that the first amendment to state interest review. Also, the process that, as I mentioned, will allow us to progress the changes for the housing supply amendment and the light rail changes. And that is the end of my presentation, with the exception of a notable need for a changed recommendation for two of the items. One, the change identifies that it's for Section 20 of the Act, but we need to cite both provisional sections of the Act to give head of power for both the tailored amendment and the major amendments under the MGR. So I believe there's been an update to those to reflect which portion of the Act give a head of power to which of the particular amendments that we'll be progressing.
Okay, so Councillors, just a couple of technical changes there. Any other questions for Gavin? Someone like to move the motion? Moved by Councillor Hamill, seconded by Councillor O'Neill. Do you want to speak to it, Councillor Hamill? Councillor O'Neill, you're right. I just wanted to say briefly that, as we know, this has been a long and arduous process with a number of hurdles placed in front of us, but the team are doing an incredible job of progressing this work, so a big thank you to them. These are important reforms, and we know that this is what the local community are after, and so it's good that we're pursuing them in a timely fashion. Councillor Peter Young.
Just briefly, Chairman, I couldn't attend the workshop, but I did have a meeting separately with the officers. Anybody who can profess to understand this earns my respect, and certainly the officers have a great handle on it, and grateful to them. Thank you.
All right, we'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. All right, Councillor Vorster, now you've got 6, did we say you got 6 items of general business? All right, councillors, it's 10:37 a.m, meeting closed.